So welcome everyone to our webinar, How to be a Happy Freelancer. I'm Cameron Hartwell, one of the customer success managers at the Work Crowd. And I'm joined by freelancers Adam Fresco and Lala Cooper. So for those of you that don't know, the Work Crowd is an online community of PR, comms, and marketing freelancers. So this is the last event in a 3-part series to commemorate the launch of the Work Crowd's new booklet, The Ultimate Guide to Freelancing, which has tips and advice for freelancers at any point in their career. So we started off the event series with how to grow your freelance business a couple of weeks ago. And last week we had a great webinar about client management, and you can find all of those recordings on our website. So today we'll be discussing how to be a happy freelancer. So how to manage your mental health as a freelancer, career development, and how to prepare for uncertain times. What we'll do is, if you have any questions as we sort of go through the webinar, if you put them in the chat function, we can then from there answer them at the end. So what I'll do is I'll just hand over to our freelancers just to introduce themselves.
Lala, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Lala Cooper and I'm a content and communications consultant. I've been working freelance on and off, flirting with freelance is what I like to say, on and off for quite a few years now, and went full-time fairly recently within the past year. I have a freelance venture, Goldline Content, which sort of bridges the intersection of PR, communications, and content creation and strategy. And I'm really happy to be here, and really happy to be hosted by the Work Crowd.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Fresco. I'm a former journalist. I worked at the Times for 20 years as a news editor, senior reporter, before going to the darker side of PR. I've looked after C-suite and the comms and strategy for clients as diverse as Battersea Power Station, Victoria's Secret, Equinox, J. Crew, Matalan. About 5 years ago, I went out on my own, created my own business, and do lots of media strategy, media training, crisis comms, and traditional PR when it's exciting enough.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so we'll get stuck in then. So I'll direct the first question. This is for you, Adam. How do you manage your mental well-being as a freelancer?
It's as in all things, I think it's balance. There'll be times when you're really busy, there'll be times when you're not so busy, and it's taking advantage of both, really. Working from home can be great, especially when the weather's this nice, but in the winter when you're stuck indoors, it's not so nice if it's not so busy. But I think loneliness it can be an issue, you know, especially if you've been used to being in an office with lots of people around bouncing ideas off of people. So it's always good to have someone or some people that you can bounce ideas off, going to town for meetings when you can, because as a freelance as well, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince, and for every 10 meetings you take, 2 may pay off immediately, but you never know in 6 months time that others may pay off. So it's getting out, keeping yourself busy, and having a to-do list. If it's not busy, try and make one call or send one email that may pay dividends down the line, so at least you feel like you've done something that day.
Of course. I mean, did you notice any change as well? Say, obviously, freelancers also used to working that mode of work of sort of working from home, isolated to a degree. Did you notice any shift amongst freelancers during the pandemic? I mean, how did people cope with that?
I don't think so, because most freelancers would have been used to working from home before the pandemic, so they actually had a head start on everyone else who had to quickly get their heads around doing that. But I think it gave you more scope to call people, to have a chat with other people who are now in the same position, even if they weren't freelancers. They're working for a company, they were still working at home on their own. So all your friends were doing the same thing, so it put them in the same boat as you. So it was quite nice to have other people in that same boat. So there were more people around. So, do you want to grab a coffee, a socially distanced coffee. So it did make a big difference, but I think it was a plus for those of us who have been doing that anyway.
Yeah, of course, it kind of shows that, you know, it does work. That is a way that you can operate. Of course. And so Lala, I mean, do you have anything to add in terms of, say, logistical side of the sort of more sort of admin side of looking after your mental well-being as a freelancer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does depend on, you know, what we mean when we say mental well-being. For a lot of people, that is a very practical and logistical point of view. It's you know, who am I speaking to that's going to support me in, if I'm struggling with isolation, or if I'm struggling with, you know, financial well-being or anything like that. For other people, it's the softer side of it. It's the really bare fundamentals of making sure that you are eating 3 meals a day and you know, getting your 30 minutes of exercise outside, which is, I'm smiling because I'm not good at either of those things. So I think when we talk about mental well-being, I know a lot of people talk about it in the form of self-care, and I think that's a great conversation to have, and I think that's really important. But what I would say to that is, you know, it's not all about lighting a candle and reading a book in your garden for 10 minutes every day. It is also about actually thinking about your needs and what that's telling you. I think for a lot of freelancers, especially who are just starting out, you know, things like financial health and well-being and financial management is a huge thing, and accessing, you know, business advisors and accountants are immediately going to massively support and give you a support structure. But I think you know, one thing that I've sort of come to realize as well is that when we talk about investing in mental well-being, we also need to talk about the financial investment that comes with it. We need to talk about, are we paying for therapy? Are we paying for you know, support in any which way we can? I think I have quite a different approach to freelancing. I personally, I don't struggle with isolation. I studied throughout my GCSEs, my A-levels and my university degree 100% at home. So I was really used to getting my head down into anything that came my way and making sure that I was disciplined enough to get it and not need the immediate kind of structure of having people around me in order to make sure that I was hitting goals and doing so in a way that was healthy. But I do know that it, you know, it presents an issue for a lot of people. So it sounds as cliched as anything, but a freelance network is always going to be a massive support. Having people around you who understand what that really means is always going to be a massive support.
And how do you guys develop that network of freelancers? I'm assuming these are freelancers operating very much in the same field as you.
I mean, for me, that helps massively because, yes, I mean, my scope is quite broad. I do PR and I do content, and the disciplines that are needed for that are quite different, I would say. So it is very broad, but it is still the fundamentals of needing to connect with someone who actually understands what it's like to freelance, who understands the pain of getting invoices paid, who understands, you know, okay, I'm really struggling with this campaign. How can I make sure that it's, you know, that I'm doing it in such a way that is successful? And I think it's really important that we're talking and brainstorming with like-minded people, even if that's not, you know, a direct collaboration. So yes, building a network is hugely important. I mean, I think for me, I've worked in the sector for about 8 years. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, I would never recommend someone go from uni to freelance. It's just, I don't think it's sustainable. And I don't think it's fair on your own career development. So a big part of my network is people who I used to work with, particularly in agencies. You know, you sort of have a shared unique experience of high demand clients and high demand employers, and you've moved past that together. And I do see so much opportunity in my own network for, you know, collaboration and also just my own sanity of being able to talk to someone who understands what I'm going through. So I don't think it necessarily has to be this big concentrated effort to go out and think, oh my goodness, I need to build a network. How am I going to do that? Or I have to go to this event, or I have to, you know, contact you. All of those things work, But actually, when we talk about a network, we talk about it in respect to the people that we have worked with directly and indirectly, and the people who we see every day in our social lives and beyond. So yeah, I would say it doesn't need to be this big kind of focused effort.
Yeah,
I don't know if you agree, Adam.
Yeah, I do. It's for the majority of PRs that are freelance will have worked somewhere first, whether it's an agency or in-house. And if you're in-house, you've probably dealt with an agency. So there's always those connections that you've made, and never be afraid to reach out to someone just to bounce an idea off of them. Or as Lara said, if it's not working, you know, I think this should work. It's not. What am I doing wrong? It's always nice to just be able to sense check, because when you're working on your own, as everyone knows, you don't always get it right, and sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, and it's good to get outside counsel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, at a permanent position in a company, obviously you have that support network of a manager and your colleagues to go to. So I could see the importance of being a freelancer and establishing that for yourself, and establishing it from people maybe that you've worked with before that have made the same transition as you into freelancing.
Yeah, and it's also, you may not have, you know, you get a client who says, right, I want some coverage in X publication, and that may not be your thing. So you reach out to another freelancer and say, look, do you have any contacts at so and so? Can you help me out? And it's, you know, it's a quid pro quo. Whatever deal you come to, it's always good to have other people that you can call on to help you out when you haven't got that expertise that is needed at that time.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's not, you know, I mean, it works both ways as well. And you will always be there to support someone else and offer a different insight. And Adam's totally right. I mean, you never know where any opportunity is going to come from. I know that for me, two of my current clients are people that I used to work with and partner with. And I've had a lot of people reaching out to me and saying, oh, I was referred to you by X, Y, and Z. Which is, you know, fantastic. And you just never know how these things are going to play out in the future. So, you know, keeping close contacts it's massively helpful, and will pay off in dividends in the end.
I see that on the platform. Sometimes I might give a heads up to a freelancer about a new project, and they'll say, you know, sorry, I'm either not interested or don't have the capacity, but I know someone, like a good friend, let me give them a call. And I find that like sense of community like really encouraging amongst freelancers. I think that's a lovely sort of, you know, sort of ethos to have, to sort of, you know, share the success. So next question, this is for you, Adam. Do you find as a freelancer, is there guilt about not working all the time, or sort of about sometimes maybe taking your foot off the pedal, taking it easy?
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. I guess it depends on your personality, but if I'm not doing something, I always, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, the whole day, or if we go away on holiday, I'm always thinking, what could I be doing? Because it's, if you're not working for that week, it means you're losing money for that week, and you're not setting something up for the week after. And what opportunities are you missing out on for 2 weeks down the line, 3 months down the line? So yeah, I do. It's a really difficult issue to navigate, and it would depend on the individual. If you can switch off and go on holiday or take the day off and do something, then that's fantastic. I'm only slowly learning to do that now. I don't know if that's because of my reporter's background, where, you know, you're always on call, you always have to have a bag ready to go on an overnight or abroad in the boot of your car, and you're available. You have to be available 24/7. I've always had that mentality, and it's the same, you know, whether it's a news editor calling you or a client calling you. I'd hate to miss that phone call that says, "Oh, do you want to represent X, or can you do so and so?" And it's a difficult one. I'm lucky that I have a very understanding wife, who recognises that, you know, that's who I am and always have been. But I think there is a line that you have to draw, but it's easy to say, it's harder to do, because if you need the money, if you need to earn that income, then it's very difficult to not be around to take those opportunities. But I think if you are like that, then it's being able to not take it on board whilst you're away. Do the work, but also enjoy where you are, which again, easier said than done. But it depends on your personality, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it, unless it really does start taking over your life and it becomes everything. Whatever you do, whatever job you've got, I don't think it should ever be everything. You have to smell the roses sometimes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as well, it does depend on what sort of work you are doing. Obviously, I notice a lot with my clients that I focus a lot of PR on. I do have a bit more of a flexible approach. I am a little bit more accessible to them, but I do still try and impart some boundaries where I can. But I think what I will say is, if you find yourself reaching that point, you have to sort of focus on what your priority is. So for me, I made the choice to go freelance for a lot of different reasons, like most people. But a huge proportion of that was my own well-being. It was my physical and mental well-being, and it was the desire to build something for myself. And a big thing that I saw, especially in agencies, was, everyone has Slack and everyone has Skype and everyone has their emails on their phone. And I absolutely fell into that trap of, my line manager would ping me a note at 10 p.m, 11 p.m, and I would immediately be on it. And that is a massive cultural issue, but it's also a personal issue of not being able to impart those boundaries. And I think when you are a freelancer, more often than not, you're probably really, really driven, which is fantastic. And I think you have to have a little bit of grit, and you have to have a little bit of drive in order to make it work, especially in the way that you want to. But comparatively, that can sort of become very easy to get into that cycle of, actually, you are becoming what you always said, oh, I'm never going to become this person. I'm never going to become like that sort of employer. And you sort of, it is very tempting to fall into that trap for yourself. I have to force myself to step away. And I know that that's not, that's an answer that I hope I never say. I hope it becomes natural for me at some point, but it's not natural now. So when things, aren't organic like that, you have to make a concentrated effort and a concentrated dedication to your own well-being. I think for me, I would say, my partner, he's very much a meditation is my pinnacle of well-being, and that's fantastic. He's able to sit straight and really, really, focus on his own health. I'm not able to do that. So my go-to is, I need to be on a treadmill and I need to run, and that is, my ultimate kind of well-being staple. So I force myself to go out and make sure that I am doing that. If it doesn't come naturally to you, you have to make a commitment to it, I would say. Otherwise, yeah, as Adam said, you fall into the trap really, really quickly.
Definitely easier said than done, though.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think it's definitely that aspect of knowing when to switch off and maybe having that sort of reset. And it is different for everyone. Like for me, it'll be cooking a nice meal for myself. But yeah, I see for other people will be, yes, meditating or exercising. Yeah. So I mean, how I suppose it's just for both of you. I mean, how do you manage? We've kind of touched upon it, but holidays as a freelancer, how do you manage that? Obviously, being the one that dictates your workflow as it is.
I don't think I've ever been on holiday without my laptop. I don't, apart from the last holiday pre-COVID, I don't think there's ever been a holiday where I haven't worked. And that's my fault. There were definitely times when I was at a PR agency and a client would call, or someone from the office would call, that someone else could have handled it. But I took it, and there were times when I had to get involved. And I think, again, it goes back down to personality. It's very easy for all of us to say, "Oh, I'm on holiday, don't call me," which is fine and great if you can and the office can. But as a freelancer, if you don't take that call, then the client may go elsewhere. And if you're dealing with journalists who have deadlines, you can't say, "Can I come back to you in 3 days?" when it's for 2 hours time or 10 minutes time online. So it's a very, very difficult balance, because there's the risk of losing clients, therefore losing income, against, I just need to reset. I just need to relax, switch off for a few days, whatever it is. But I don't think as a freelance that is always that simple, because you know, if you're not around, you don't get the work, and someone else will. And I think it's just making sure you've got that balance. So if you are away for a week and 2-3 days of that is spent working, then it's that work that's paid for the holiday, is the way I sort of try and justify it in my head. And there'll be lots of people out there disagreeing with that you need to switch off your phone and not do any work. And that's, you know, I agree with that as well. I find that very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think it does require, freelancing, whatever you're doing freelance, it requires a dose of reality. When we talk about freelance, I think the really common misinterpretation of that and misconception is that you are always working the hours that you want. You're working 10 till 3, or you work, you know, and never on a weekend. And I think the unfortunate truth is that that's probably not realistic for the most part, especially if you are just starting out. However, what you do end up having is the ability to construct your own schedule around other commitments. So for example, I want to go and see a friend on Friday afternoon, so I don't want to work. And I have plans most of the weekend. So yes, I might do an hour of emails on Saturday, or an hour of admin, but I will front load certain work, and it will enable me then to take a focused break to spend time with people. There is always going to be give and take. And I was saying that I've just recently signed a new client, which is really exciting, and I'm so happy to be working for them. But probably didn't give the forethought that their first big annual event that I'll be supporting them on is about 2 weeks after my wedding. So I had to have the awkward conversation with my partner. Okay, you know, that honeymoon we were talking about, you know, is it possible to just shift it a little bit later? And I have the ability to do that, and I, you know, have someone who's very supportive of that and who understands that that is just the nature of it. But I will be 100% committed to that event, and I will be 100% committed to that honeymoon when it happens. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that any freelancer has to learn. It doesn't always work out that you will have the time off that you want, but if you play it right, and of course it does depend on the type of freelancing that you do, you know, it is possible to take more time off. But yes, I would say that you are able to probably take, you know, an extra hour in the evening when, you know, if you can, then you should. You absolutely should.
I think it depends on the kind of work that you do. If you're doing work that you can schedule, then that's fine. But if you're doing crisis comms, you can't schedule a crisis. And I had that last night. A client rang me late in the evening to say, this is happening, can you help? And you can't say, oh, you know, I'll get back to you on Saturday. And those, yeah. There's those sort of things that you can't schedule. But Lala, I think you're absolutely right. Where you can schedule stuff and leave yourself breaks, especially if you're going away, then you can. But there's always that unforeseen phone call that will ruin the best laid plans. And I think you have to be around for that. That's just the nature of the beast. You if you're in that world, you just have to accept that.
Yeah, of course. And that's the choice you make, isn't it, when you go into a specific line of work? And it's the choice you make when you decide whether or not, you know, even with content, I sometimes get emails through and say, look, we really need this blog done by the end of the day. Can we do it? And I will be flexible and I will do it. And I think that's a great ability. And you can impart your boundaries as far as possible, but you have that choice. But it is why I always say, and there's a great section in the freelance booklet actually about this, but it's why I always say try and get retainers on a monthly or project basis rather than doing hourly work where you can, because it does enable you to kind of front load a lot of what you do, as Adam says, you know, that schedule aspect of it. So that's always a massive practical tip that I would give anyone. If you can introduce that in your working structure, then it will be massively beneficial to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose that also sort of incorporates a bit of sort of stability as well, going to how much you have coming in each month and what the workflow is like. I think that's interesting as well, talking about, say, partners that aren't freelancers, that, you know, and you probably have to get to that point where you do have that understanding that, to an extent, this is how you work, and there may be times where holidays are affected in some way or the other, but obviously you can try to mitigate that as much as you can, I suppose.
Yeah, and it plays a huge role, any kind of relationship that you have when you're a freelancer. You know, the choice that I have made is that I try and work relatively the same hours as my partner, and when he's off at the gym or when he's off seeing his friends or whatever, I will also front load work where I can, so that we have that dedicated time together. But it requires a lot of fine-tuning and conversation, and I think a massive part of when you are a freelancer, your own mental well-being is other people's mental well-being as well. You never want to sacrifice someone else and your time with someone else for a client. Sometimes it has to happen, and it will happen. It does happen, but there is a pretty delicate balance, I would say, in that.
Of course. I suppose we'll shift now slightly to just career development. And I suppose this is a question for both of you, really. So what words of advice would you have for people that are maybe just starting out as a freelancer in regards to career development?
I think take as many meetings as you can, meet as many people as you can. It may not pay off that day, that week, that month, but the more people you meet, the more you get your name known, and the more chance there is that someone calls you and says, look, can you help with this? Always be accessible, always be around when someone needs you, because you need to get that momentum going when you're starting out. And call. Don't be afraid to call in favors, call people and saying, look, I'm doing this now. Let me know if you need any help. You can't be shy.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And also, you know, making sure that when you do take those meetings, you feel fully prepared. You've done research on that client, and you are going in with a good elevator pitch for yourself and for your work and what makes it different, your USP, and having all of your ducks in a row like that. For me, you know, I would say when you are first starting out as a freelancer, there's so much going on, there really is, that it can be really difficult to make time for any sort of learning and development. But taking a step back and thinking, okay, well, how is this going to pay off in the long run, and how's this going to make me feel more comfortable as well when I talk about certain things with clients? How's it going to increase my confidence? One thing that I'm looking to do at the minute is collaborate with freelancers really in very, very niche types of communications and content areas, because, you know, I've worked in agencies which have quite specific tunnel vision when it comes to their service and their packages. So that's one thing that I really would like to do, because then I'm approaching it in the exact same way that, you know, I would want someone to come to me for. And it does require, again, a commitment and a concentrated effort, but, you know, you go into freelance because you want to be your own boss and you want to make it work. And I think it makes complete financial and career professional sense to take a step back and really dedicate, you know, an hour each week to something where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sort of the power as a freelancer to able to decide who you can work with as well. I think that's hugely important as well.
Yeah, massively so. And I think as well, I mean, it really does depend on what kind of background you come from. If you are doing in-house, you're going to have a very specific type of way of doing something. If you're agency, you probably have a little bit of a more diverse understanding of different client needs and different business models and structures, which makes leveraging that just a little bit easier. So it's always what I do say. I mean, I talk a lot about how most agencies don't have a work-life balance and they don't have boundaries, and and it can be very, very challenging particularly as a young professional. But having said that, the learning that you have in agencies is exponential, and I would really recommend working in at least one or two before going freelance, because it feels like even if you're doing it for a year, it feels like you're there for the equivalent of 2 years. Yeah, it's a practical tip, and it's, like I said, it's a long-term investment in my books.
Yeah, definitely.
And what can freelancers do, I suppose, at any point in their career to mitigate stress? And in terms of, I suppose, of things like everyday, say, admin or logistics, do you guys have any sort of self-imposed systems in place, or do you use any particular resources to help you with that?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Everything. I have to be quite an organized person. I live with chronic illness, so I have a lot of brain fog. If I don't write it down, it very rarely crops up again. So I have to be organized, and I like that. I like the structure. On a really practical level, I do have quite a specific process. I have an entire pipeline spreadsheet, and I have a workflow spreadsheet where I can track things and always look back on as well, which makes things a lot easier and simpler for me. And I would say I am quite stringent with my time to make sure that I am fitting in all my client work and all my admin, and making sure that everything kind of runs as smoothly as possible. But I mean, in terms of stability and everything, I'm a big, and I don't think this is any secret, but I'm a big advocate for financial education and financial well-being, particularly for younger people. And I think if you're a woman and you decide to take some time off for work, or if you're anyone to decide to take some time off in the future for family, it's really important that you get your financial well-being as structured and as strong as possible. So I'm a huge advocate for making sure that you are baking in all of your time, you are baking in all of the value that you're adding to clients in your quotes, and also taking things into consideration, what tools you need and what resources you need. So financial well-being for me is the foundation which everything else is built upon, because it can cause so much stress and anxiety, I think, particularly for people who are less established. So yes, that's probably one thing that I would always recommend, is looking up your rights as a freelancer. For example, if no one pays your invoice, and understanding, I think particularly in terms of what interest you can charge and what steps you can take and things like that, and becoming really confident in your authority to protect yourself like that. It's a huge thing for me. It's always what I would recommend.
Yeah, I would. Apologies if you can hear some music in the background. The hotel I'm in, I've just decided to turn the disco.
Got a party, Adam.
Yeah, on my own, life of a freelancer. The only thing I would add to that is make sure that you have everything written down, because whilst you're not busy, it's fine. But when it does get busy, the last thing you want to do is not send an invoice out. So everything you do, write it down somewhere. Have your own system where, right, I'm doing this work in this month for this client, I'm charging them X, I'm invoicing on Y. Make sure you get that system down and be really strict about it, because if you're not for 1 month, 2 months, that soon adds up. And if you forget to send an invoice out for 6 months, or you forget to send an invoice out at all, or you forget to bill appropriately, that's a sin in the freelance world. So make sure that you have everything written down and you have your own system, whatever that is. And I think I might be preempting you, Cameron, but whenever you discuss something with a client, if you haven't got a formal contract, or you feel like it's too much to send a formal contract, always send an email just putting down in writing what you've just discussed with the client. How much, how long for, what the KPIs are. So, I think we've all probably, a lot of us will have experienced this. You have a conversation with someone, you do the work, and they say, I'm not paying you for that because you didn't do X. You say, well, I never said I would. And then it's your word against theirs. It becomes very messy. So always, even if it's just an email recounting the conversation you've had, always send an email saying, look, just to just to reiterate, this is what we discussed.
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough.
I couldn't agree more. I think that becomes particularly true if you are upselling. If you have a pre-existing contract, whether that's hourly basis or particularly if it's a monthly retainer or a project retainer with a client, and they give you a call and say, can you just do this quick? There can be a misinterpretation that you can do that baked into the retainer. And sometimes you can. Sometimes if it is a value add, or sometimes if it is a smaller piece of work, you have that option to do that for the client relationship. But more often than not, there is the likelihood of there being a misinterpretation there. So make sure that you are saying, I'm just going to quote that for you. And then, as Adam says, repeat that in an email, because the last thing you want is to first of all not get paid. So that's the very last thing you want. But you don't want to harm the relationship that you have with your client, especially if it's a really, really strong one. So be super clear at all times. Yeah.
And know your worth as well. It's very easy
yeah.
just starting out, or even not, if you're established and a client says to you, can you just do this? It's £3,000 of work you're charging. So we've only got £800. Sometimes it's very tempting to say yes, but I'm sure they wouldn't do it if the shoe was on the other foot. So stick to your guns. Know what you're worth. And I think sometimes you'll lose it, but I think that's a risk worth taking, because why should you do the work for them that may end up earning them 5 times what they've paid you, 20 times what they've paid you, and they're not paying properly for it? They wouldn't do it, I'm sure. So always know your worth.
And I think as well, a lot of industries are quite close-knit, and you do tend to come around the same people, especially in PR and comms, where you're working with kind of a set type of client, you do tend to come around the same people. And if there's a disparity in what you have charged one versus the other, and if it's a significant disparity and it's not immediately obvious, it can crop up. It's not something I've personally seen as a freelancer, but it is something I've seen in agency. And oh boy, it's messy. Don't do it. It's so messy. So I wouldn't recommend it.
I know, it's interesting. I suppose you don't want any ambiguity when you're interacting with a client, and whether you get around that by contract, or, as you're saying, having it in writing, just sort of laying out deliverables, things like that. I suppose it's going to save you a lot of sort of save you that headache further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think that's very interesting. We'll move on to the next point, to the final point: preparing for times of uncertainty. Adam, I'll come to you for this first. What can freelancers do to prepare for times of uncertainty?
Play the lottery.
Sorry, what can freelancers do? Yeah.
I think, listen, it's tough. So, hopefully you'll have some good months. That's not the time to spend 3 weeks in the Maldives, but put some money away for when it's not as good and you've got some cash to draw on. I think we've covered this. Build up contacts, maintain your networks. When you're busy and things are going well, it's easy to forget the basics of going out, meeting people, making those phone calls, sending those emails, because you're so busy at the time. But that's fine whilst it is busy. But if the next month is quiet, you might need to ring some of those people that you spoke to last month just to say, hi, I'm still here. Let's have a coffee. And it's just keeping as many options open as you can, keeping your network going. Even if it's clients you're not working for anymore, just ring them every now and again, saying, no, just checking in, I'm around, anything I can do for you. Take every meeting, no matter how much of a pain it may be. Today is a really lovely day. Going on the tube after a strike is not fun. I've just been into town, an hour and 20 minutes on the train to take a meeting for 20 minutes, which may not pay off now, but could pay off in the coming months. I don't know, it may not. But if you don't do those things, you'll never know. So it's a gamble, but I think you have to do that. You're working for yourself. You haven't got someone paying you a guaranteed full-time salary. So you have to create it yourself. And the only way to do that is to network, make calls, emails, and just stay in touch. But as I say, when times are good, don't spend it all, because you may need it, hopefully not, but you may need it in 2 months' time. And that's it's also a good way not to get too stressed about paying the bills when you know you've got a war chest behind you somewhere.
Yeah, it's like I said, financial well-being really underpins so much of what you do. As a sole trader, you're not legally obliged to have a business bank account, but I do. That's the way that I choose to operate. And I take drawings from that, and I take them very minimally, I would say. And I'm very happy and confident in that decision, because it does, as Adam said, it gives you that boost behind you. On a really practical level, I mean, if you do want to go freelance, a good way of doing it is to take it one step at a time, maybe move into a contract role and then move into freelance. It gives you a little bit more flexibility, and it gives you a bit of a taste as well of the reality of it. I would say probably during quieter times, it can be quite easy to feel a little bit wary and a little bit anxious and, downright frightened. I'm totally underplaying it. It can be scary. It is also an opportunity to build up your resources in other means. There will be times where you don't have time to write a social media strategy for your brand or your personal account, your personal LinkedIn account, or anything like that. There can be times where you don't have, the opportunity to write thought leadership material, which can really, incur a lot of good traction on LinkedIn and social channels. And I would say that even if you don't have any client work going on, in combination with all of that, make sure you're out there pitching, make sure you're making good contacts. Also spend time on your brand, because you won't have the opportunity to do that down the line, and it then gives you a bank to just sort of turn out as and when you can. And I think that's a really simple way of making sure that you are keeping that sort of narrow focus. Okay, this is what I do, and this is why I'm doing it, and this is why I can support clients in a really meaningful way. So it's hugely supportive in that respect. I think personal impact as well. Make sure that those are the moments, particularly I would say in the first year, 2 years, you are building up good habits. You are making sure that you are turning off your laptop and going out, even if it means working an hour later, making sure that you're doing that for yourself, and building up the fundamentals is a really good way of keeping the habits going in a healthy, consistent manner, even when you do get busy. And things evolve, I mean, especially as a freelancer, it's rare that you'd have 2 days the same. Things do evolve very, very quickly. And I think if you have a little bit of grit and a little bit of drive and a bit of motivation, you'd be surprised at how quickly things pick up, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think it's also that sort of, you need to utilize your time properly, don't you? I suppose if you do have that sort of downtime period where there's not a lot going on, like you said, so either look for new work, have those meetings, or sort of, maintain your network, or sort of grow your own brand itself. I mean, Adam, I know you were talking about sort of, go for every meeting. There must be frustration to an extent when maybe you have, I don't know, maybe 5 meetings and maybe only 2 or 1 are actually quite fruitful from that. How do you handle that?
I just think it's it's the nature of the beast, isn't it? I've had loads of meetings that people say, oh yeah, can you do this? It's really important. It's really urgent. Can you do this? Can you do this? Yeah, I can do that. You make time. Oh yeah, we're doing next month. And then next month turns into the month after, and then they disappear completely. And that will always happen. But of those 5 meetings, 2 of those people may ring me in 3 months, 6 months time and say, I know we had that meeting, sorry we didn't come back to you, but can you do this? Or they may say, they move jobs as well. And so they may go to another firm and go, oh, I met Adam 6 months ago, he does this, let's give him a ring. So it's a pain when it doesn't happen, because you've invested time, which is money, but you never know what will come of it. Sometimes it's absolutely nothing, but I say a high percentage of the time you will get something from it, even if it's not then, even if it's not from that firm. As I say, that person may go somewhere else, And if you're professional and you go back to what you said, Lola, about having your pitch ready, making sure you know your worth, making sure you've got that niche in the market, explaining properly what you can do for them and how, they may then move to another job. Something comes up and they go, oh, we'll give Adam a ring. And that's what you're hoping for. Or they talk to someone else and who says, oh, I'm looking for this. And they go, oh yeah, I know the person for that. And that's all you can do. And so when times, if it's not busy, you can call that person. If you've had a meeting, nothing's come from it, say, look, we met 6 months ago, just checking in. And the more meetings you take, it's harder you work, the luckier you get. The more meetings you take, the more chance you have of actually getting something. If you don't take those meetings, you haven't got a chance.
Yeah, it's like any other investment, really. And I had the experience of working really hard on a pitch deck and a strategy proposal for a client, and it didn't pan out. And it was really disappointing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't regret it one instance. You do things for a reason at the time, and it's really important not to get too tied up into that cycle of thinking, oh, well, if I had focused on this instead of this, it might have turned out differently. It's really hard not to do that, but ultimately this is something everyone should tell themselves, is that you are doing a better job than you think you are doing, and you'd be amazed at how quickly things pick up when you have a lot of confidence in your own abilities. If you've decided to go freelance, it's almost definitely because you are an extremely competent, capable, experienced individual. And I think it's really easy when you don't get regular feedback from clients or from a line manager or anything like that, to forget that. But actually taking a step back and taking a minute to think about the work that you've inputted and what it's resulted in is I would say a really big thing. One of the things that I was advised to do, this was years and years ago, was that when you are feeling super, super down, remember to always take every great piece of feedback or every great result and just shove it in a inbox somewhere or a folder somewhere, and look back on it as much as possible. And it will kind of remind you, really specific examples, it will remind you, oh, okay, no, I am doing a good job, okay, I didn't get that client, but it doesn't matter because I did this amazing job and there'll be a next opportunity. I'm a forever optimist, that I really, I firmly believe everything happens for a reason. And I just think there's always something to be taken from every action and decision.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely little sort of tidbit, isn't it? Sort of keeping all that positive feedback and your successes in one place that you can sort of just dip into when need be to draw on. I think it's interesting. It sounds like a sort of staying on people's radar as well. When I've seen it in the work crowd though before, where say a client has shifted to another company and has come back to get a freelancer say from the work crowd because they know that like it's worked for them before in that instance, and they go somewhere else, they'll take it with them. Yeah. What I'll do now, I think we'll open the sort of floor to questions just from the attendees. I've got one here that I'll read out. In my experience, clients quickly come to expect constant availability if you're being responsive when the work demands it. How do you set boundaries with them if the work is fast moving, they still want and need to take time away from them, from work generally? And how do you express this without them seeing you as not committed to their needs?
I think it depends on the clients. If it's if someone's emailing you or WhatsApping you at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday to say, and it's a question that doesn't it's not urgent, doesn't need answering at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday, don't answer it. Wait till 9 a.m. on a Monday. But if it's something urgent that needs doing, then you have to be available. But I guess it depends on the client, on the urgency of that communication, and whether you can leave it. And it depends on the personality of the client as well. If they are someone that, if you're not around 24/7, we won't work with you, then you know where you are. And then it's up to you whether you take that client on. If it only emerges that they're like that once you've taken the job, then it's a decision for you to make personally. But there are clients who will email, call, WhatsApp, weekends, night times, when it's not urgent and it can wait. And then it depends on your relationship with them. If you want to start that and not have those boundaries, then answer. It shows you are available all the time. But I find that if it's not super urgent, then I'm lying to myself. I will always answer, and that's wrong. It's wrong. I was trying to think of a situation where I haven't, but I will always will. I just can't help it, and it's wrong. It's not the right thing to do, because then they call you, and I've spent Boxing Day lunches outside the restaurant on the phone for an hour with a client. It was a crisis comm situation. Didn't have to be dealt with then, but I did. And I just think it depends. It depends on you and the boundaries that you want to set. And they're not always healthy, but it's just the way that I work. I hate to miss a client call. It's just the way I am. I'm not saying that's the way to do it at all. It's just the way that I'm built, I think.
I think as well, it depends on what you mean by, being committed to a client's needs. If you're doing ad hoc work for a client, then that's wonderful. If you're on a monthly retainer, that is quite significant, and you are quite invested, particularly from a strategic point of view. If you're working on their content strategy, or if you're working on their internal comm strategy, or anything, you are committed to their needs. There's a level of commitment, and I think this is where I am very open and communicative about expectations in small ways. Like, I won't send an email unless it's really urgent. I won't send an email past a certain time. I can respond then, but I can schedule it. Or I won't necessarily take every single call, even if if something's coming through and there is a gap in my I won't always do that, because I don't want to set the expectation. However, I also meet them halfway a lot of the time, and I do say, well, no, actually, I can see from their point of view, you have to sort of have the mindset, I would say, of this is their whole world, this is their whole career world. It might not be yours, but it is theirs, and what would they need and what would they want, if the roles were reversed. And that's not to say that you then become an employee of that client, but it is to say that if you do have a specific agreement and there is opportunity to really support their needs and objectives, you never know when that's going to turn into an upsell, or, hey, meet this contact of mine, or anything like that. So I would say that there is a lot of give and take. For me personally, being in that agency environment and then coming out of it and working freelance, my working structure is absolutely not that I will take every single call and email back constantly. I do not do that. I do not meet the urgency that other people have, unless it really does, it does require it, or I'm able to provide it. So I am quite strict with how much I respond and how frequently I respond, I would say, but I'm always fair. So Adam's right, it does depend on your own type of work and your own working structure. But just because someone says it's urgent doesn't necessarily mean it is. And you have the right as a freelancer to step back and make that decision. You absolutely do.
Yeah, I suppose it's setting boundaries, isn't it? And those boundaries will depend on who you are as an individual, how you work, and the client as well, or how important that client probably fits amongst your roster. So I'm conscious of the fact we're kind of getting up to the hour now. So I think we'll just end with just one last question. Because we've talked a lot about, say, mitigating stress or things that can be, stressful. Just question for both of you. I think a nice way to end it. What do you love about freelancing? What makes you happy about it? You obviously do enjoy it. So I'll just sort of let you guys answer just each.
Oh, Laura.
Any one thing? I don't know if I can pick one thing. I would say
Maybe a few things if you like.
Yeah, it sounds really cliched, but the relationships that I have with my clients are always going to take precedence. I would say that if I didn't enjoy relationship building and supporting businesses and supporting individuals, I wouldn't be a freelancer. I would probably just I don't know what I would do. Take a new job. I don't know. It's really important to me. I'm a people person, and I really, I really, really value adding value, and I like making people's lives easier in some capacity. So it's a huge part of it for me. I loved it in agency, and I didn't want to sacrifice it. And I genuinely probably wouldn't take or stay with a client who I believed didn't have a moral compass of vision. I really do believe that. And I know it's an idealistic point of view, but it's just not something I can't necessarily work with someone who I don't gel with in my own values. I think the other side of it is ownership. I love taking ownership of other people's, strategies and deliveries. And it does enable you to be creative and create processes and structures that sometimes can be quite elusive when you are working for an employer permanently. So I would say that those two things are probably the biggest for me. Absolutely. Being your own boss is hard work, but I personally love it. And I love the dynamic and diverse nature of what I do. So it's about 4 things there. I love a lot about it.
For me, I think it's the autonomy, being able to choose your clients to some extent, being able to think, you know what, I'm going to take the dog for a walk now. I'm going to go and sit in the garden, have a cup of tea now. I'm going to go to the gym now. That's, you shouldn't take that for granted. I think it's a really big bonus of working for yourself, is you can choose your hours when you can. But I think working, to touch on what you said, Laura, working with people you want to work with, working with nice people, with good people, with interesting people, and learning as well. If you every client that you take, I try and learn something from, because they're all fascinating people. They've, a lot of them have built their own businesses, all very successful, and it's good to look at these people and how did they get to that position? What did you do? And you got time with them. It's a privileged position to be in, that if you're looking after their comms, or it's media training or messaging or crisis comms, you become a big part of their life, both professional and personal. And it's a privileged insight to have a lot of the time. That is people you would never ever otherwise meet, and I think that's a really fascinating part of the job for me, and helping them.
Lovely. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Lala. Thank you for that, Adam. Sure, everyone really appreciate your thoughts and insights on how to be a happy freelancer. I think we'll end it here, obviously, as we're 2 minutes to the hour. Thank you for everyone for attending, and thank you for everyone that's attended the other events that we put on this month. What we'll do is we will send out a recording of this webinar, and the Ultimate Guide to Freelancing booklet, I believe is available to download from our website for free, so you'll be able to access it there. Okay, lovely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care, all. Bye.